Hi, John.
Hi, Tony. Good to see you.
Good to see good to see you. Um, Now we know each other, we've worked together, but for the listeners today and the listeners to come, could you please share your name and what it is that you do for a living today?
Yes, of course. My name is John Noakes, and I work for Amazon Web Services as a partner development specialist today.
Lovely. Okay. Now, I wonder what it was you wanted to be when you grew up. So we're going to go back in time a
Okay.
little bit to ask what your memories of secondary school are.
Yeah, right. So, secondary school. I was at secondary school back in the day when they still had the 11 plus. I kind of had that half pass in the 11 plus because you either went. There was three different streams where I lived. You went to what was then called secondary modern,
Hmm.
or technical college, or a grammar school. And I passed my 11 plus to go to a technical college. So obviously that was at the age of 11. And when I think about those 5 years I was at secondary school, because I left when I was 16,
Hmm.
um, the first year was really a case of understanding what planet I'd landed on. It was completely different to what I'd experienced before, as with most people, I guess, coming from junior school. But I quickly used the experiences I'd gained in that first year to understand, because it was a technical high school, a lot of the subject matter was a little bit more sort of science oriented, technically
Hmm.
oriented, and I started to get to grips with that. And yeah, it was quite interesting. There's still the reading, writing, arithmetic stuff that was going on, but my
Yeah,
memories of secondary school were during those 5 years. It was a case of understanding uh, how my career might map out. I didn't even use the word career back then. What did that mean? What sort of
yeah.
job do you want to do, John? So, yeah, I think I didn't really start focusing on that until the third or fourth year. So when I was about 14 years old, I knew what I was going to do. Yeah, and that
Right.
really shaped the rest of the time leading up to my O levels.
Yeah.
The GCSEs these days, but back then it was GCE O levels.
So you knew what you wanted to do, right?
Yeah.
Which was what?
I yeah, I knew from the age of 14 really that I was going to go to sea. I had the
Yeah.
calling. A lot of people do talk about that to say, well, is it a natural thing that you just know you're going to have to do? And in
Yeah.
my case, it probably was. I was a third generation seafarer in my family,
Hmm.
and I didn't need any convincing. I knew that by about 14 years old that that's the path that I wanted to follow. Didn't quite know what job I wanted to do, but
Hmm.
the initial sort of destination, if you will, was chosen in my head. You're going to go to
Right.
sea, John. And I started reading a lot about the opportunities and then researching
Hmm.
how I could go to sea. And at that point, I didn't know whether I would be going to sea as an officer or a rating. I didn't know if I was going to be targeting the military with the Royal Navy or commercial world with the Merchant Navy. That came over the following couple of years.
So if you're third generation, so dad and granddad, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Just never know. Could have been your mum and your grandma, maybe.
Yeah, it
Well,
was my father and my grandfather were both at sea. Yeah, yeah.
um, so did they expect that you would? Was
Um, Not really. I mean, my father at the time was a police officer. He's retired now, but uh, he was a police officer, so there was a level of, I suppose, discipline and uniformity in the house.
mm,
And I'm the eldest of four children, so it was. Yeah, I talked to my dad about it, but he didn't push me, or he didn't say, "Hey, John, this is the direction you need to head in." It was none of that.
okay.
So yeah, the subject of the sea wasn't really all prevalent in our household, right? It was
Mm,
something that was in the background, and I just used my natural curiosity, which I still retain to this day, to
mm,
investigate it and think, well, what could this offer me? And all the usual things were coming out. If anyone's looked at that subject, you're going to think about the travel, the exploration, the going to various parts of the world and experiencing different cultures, etc., etc. So, but then again, if I do that, how do I know I'm not going to be seasick, right? So
well,
there was all that
yeah.
side of it as well.
Um, so you said I'm going to go to sea. How did that inform your choices of what GCs or O levels, what areas you were going to do?
Yeah, I quickly realized that the path I wanted to follow was to be an officer cadet
Hmm.
as a navigating officer. So from the age of 14 up to 15, I was doing a lot of research into shipping companies that were um, recruiting cadets to do that
Yeah.
apprenticeship. And I knew from that that the subjects I would have to be able to pass O levels at grade C or above were maths, physics, and English.
Yeah.
So that determined where my studies went, and I followed that path. And I had to do my physics O level twice. I failed it the first time,
Hmm.
but in a way that was a good thing because it taught me to dig deeper and say, John, don't give up. You've got to go back to this. And I did.
Yeah.
And I got it the second time, and they were the entry requirements to be accepted as a cadet.
Wow. I'm just like, it's funny. It's that thing of if you know, you know. So for you, it was like
Yeah,
you say, it was
yeah,
no, you just knew.
yeah, I did.
What was the kind of guidance or attitude at your school? Because it was, as you say, you could leave school at 16 and enter the workplace. Was there any expectation or guidance from the school when you said to them, "These are my plans. This is what I want to do"?
Uh, yes and no. I'll deal with the no first because when I went
Yeah,
to the careers officer and I said,
yeah.
"Oh, I want to go to sea," he um he then started looking at his shoes, I suppose, and thinking, oh, what do I do here? I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. What have we
Ah,
got in the careers office in
yeah,
terms of documentation, research, background information that I can help this
yeah,
pupil with?
yeah,
He didn't have anything to hand,
yeah.
but to his credit, he went away and got something. And the following week, I had a set of prospectuses and, just understanding what that was all about. So that was the no bit. The yes bit was once that had been solidified, if you will, the school were very supportive, and actually some of my fellow pupils,
Mm,
I had a couple of guys that I was at school with that ended up going to sea as well as engineering cadets
mm,
rather than navigating, but nevertheless, the destination was similar. So we kind of teamed up and had a common denominator of going to sea,
mm.
So yeah, that was the way that worked really.
Great. So you went. I take it, John.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk to me about that. What happened? How does a 16-year-old go, right, I've finished secondary education and now I'm going to go to sea?
Yeah, yeah. So it was a massive moment, and in terms of life-changing event, I guess. If you think about that, I was 16 years and 3 months old, and my parents took me down to join my first ship in Middlesbrough. It was a rusty old 18,280-ton iron ore carrier on charter
Yeah.
to British Steel when British had a steel industry, bringing
Mm,
iron ore from various parts of the world into the UK to British steel plants.
yeah.
And when I was standing on the dockside watching this vessel come in, yeah, of course I was nervous. My parents were nervous. I was filled with trepidation. Blimey,
Yeah.
this is real. This is real.
Yeah.
I'm going to step onto this vessel and that's
Yeah.
it. I'm off. So
Wow.
it really was a big moment. And of course I would be stupid. And if I was to deny that I got homesick, of course I did. Anyone would. But
Mm,
it was quickly usurped by the busyness, the activity, the program of learning that I had to follow. Because before I stepped on that vessel, I had a 2 week induction period at college,
right.
at a marine college, to kind of just set the expectations, right? So it worked out all right in the end. But that first that first voyage, when we left Teesside, Redcar Iron Ore Terminal, and we went off to a port in West Africa in Mauritania called Nouadhibou. And I'm thinking, blimey, I've never been out the country before, and here we are. We're going to Africa. Whoa, what's that going to
Wow.
be like? So yeah, it was the start of a 14-year adventure, really.
Well, I take it you did come home. You came
Oh
back to
yes,
UK
yes, yeah,
shores in those
yeah.
14 years.
Yes, exactly. Each trip was somewhere between 4 and 8 months away. My longest trip was 8 months, but most of them were 4 or 5 months away,
Right.
which
And
is still quite a long time, right?
it is. It is. And what sort of springs to mind for me is that I have an understanding, but not a deep understanding. So kids I went to school with joined the armed forces,
Yeah.
and there was, a huge training induction period that goes on for a matter of months, but you are generally fairly close to home-ish. When you get on a boat and go to sea for 4 months, I don't think if you say I'm not cut out for this, they could send you home, could they?
Yeah, that's right. Is you're committed,
Wow.
Um, yeah, and I think it's interesting because what made it a little bit more understandable for me, even at that young age, was I was starting a 4-year apprenticeship. So I
Okay.
signed indentures,
Yeah.
apprentices indentures, which my father had to sign because I was under 18.
Yeah.
And that meant that I was staring into the mouth of a 4-year structured learning program
Yeah.
with some time at college, some time at sea, so a sandwich course in real respects, culminating after 4 years
Yeah.
in the achievement of a second mate certificate, a foreign going second mate certificate from the Department of Trade and Industry, as it was then, the
Right.
Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, as it is now. So that was what I was heading for. It was a formal, internationally recognised qualification that could be used anywhere in the world.
Yeah. What did you plan to do with that once you had it? And what did you do with it once you had it?
And that was really the first step on the journey to
Hmm.
become a ship's master, a captain. So in that industry, in that career path, there are 3 professional qualifications to gain. Second mate certificate, then you move on to first mates, and then you move on to masters. And it's not
Hmm.
like you can do them just the next week after you've got one. You then have to have qualifying sea time and then some more study time at college. So the studying goes on. But I knew that when I set out on that path, that I wanted to get a master's ticket as quickly as possible. And
Mm.
the fastest time, the minimum time you need to do to get a master's ticket is 10 years. And I did it in 10 years. So I gained my
Wow.
master's ticket at 26, having gone to sea at 16. And you can't do it any quicker. That's the youngest you could possibly get it. In fact, you wouldn't get that now because nobody goes to sea at 16. So it would be
No.
28, 29 now. So
Right.
I knew when I started that that was a goal, an ambition, a
Yeah.
target. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
So explain for those of us that don't know what, you've got your master's, so you're a ship's captain. You could be qualified to be a ship's captain.
That's right.
Um, in the commercial kind of shipping
Mhm.
industry. What does that mean? So you've got your masters. What are you then in charge of, responsible for? What's the kind of stuff that you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, the master of the ship is in charge of the ship, right? And
Mm.
all its crew, all its contents, the cargo. You are responsible. The book stops here, to use a common phrase, I suppose. But I mean, there are so many disciplines and so many activities that make up that role. You've got
Mm.
everything from, crew management, you've got watchkeeping officers, you've got the safety of the vessel, you've got stability, ship construction, business and law, medical,
Right.
signaling. The list goes on. I mean, if you think about it, Tony, you could be on a vessel in the middle of anywhere, and you think,
Yeah.
well, it's not. It's a little bit different now because technology's advanced, but back then,
Yeah.
it's not like I could pick up a satellite phone and just get someone to come and rendezvous with me. You kind of got to get on with it. You got to get on with it, and
You can
it's
get an app for that now.
yeah, you can. But I mean, in back when I was at sea, that was way before that technology. So yeah.
It just kind of it blows my mind that at 26,
Hmm.
some people might just be doing their masters at uni.
Exactly, exactly.
And you say, what have you had to look after? Well,
That's it. And I
they've
think
looked after their own
yeah,
learning.
and it's really interesting because the very first time I got a command, my first ship that I was captain of, I
Yeah.
was the youngest person on that vessel,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And when you've had an experience like that, you think, blimey, and there is no way that I knew more and had more experience than the other
Mm.
officers and crew. They had way more experience than me. However,
Mm.
the opportunity to learn from them, and to retain the responsible position to be in charge, and
Mm,
issue instructions if they were necessary. Yeah, it's two-way traffic, and I've retained that approach right up until today, learning from others as well as teaching others.
mm. Um, and I'll have to find it because I can't remember. But there is something. But there's a guy that used to. He was captain of a submarine. Teaches about leadership and letting people be responsible for themselves rather than
Yeah,
dictating orders.
exactly.
Um, wow. So you've kind of answered my next question a little bit, but what sprung to mind for me was, oh, there's so much. Um, how do you, I don't like the term humble, but when you've been when you've captained, been responsible for a ship at the age of 26 and all the things that that entails, how do you keep yourself grounded, um, and not get carried away with, I guess, the excitement of having that level of responsibility?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, Tony, and I would answer it in a number of ways. First of all, when you're in that position and you're doing what you need to do, there is so much going on. It's
Mm,
like being in charge of a floating factory, right?
mm.
There's lots of things happening at the same time. You never get time to rest on your laurels and think, yeah, I'm the boss. I'm going to sit in my cabin with my feet up and everyone will come to me. It's not like
Yeah.
that at all. You gotta
Mm,
you gotta get on with it. And I think what helped me was during that period, so I had 4 years command experience between 26 and 30, and then came ashore. But during that period, my time was spent in the offshore oil industry. So the vessels that I was in charge of were quite specialized vessels in a very specific industry. Now that's a fast moving, that
mm,
it really is a floating factory environment, right? Because there's lots of things happening. And the different types of specialized vessels that I was working on gave me the opportunity to learn even more. A dive support vessel is different from an anchor handling tug, and an anchor handling tug is different from a supply boat, and a supply boat is different from a remote operated vehicle vessel that's putting submarines under the water to check oil pipelines, right? There's a lot of stuff going on there,
mm.
and I learned a lot. So I didn't get time to sit back and think, yeah, I'm the boss. Yeah, you might be the boss, but there's a day job to be done. My hands were
Yeah.
still my hands were still black at the end of the day from hard work.
Yeah.
I working boots were dirty. My hard
Yeah.
hat was covered in scars. Yeah, you had to get on with it.
Yeah. Wow. So where do you go from there? So 4 years command experience, you go ashore, and then what happens?
Yeah, and again, just like the decision I took from school to go to sea, I took another life-changing decision at around about the age of 29, and it was solidified when I woke up on the morning of my 30th birthday. I was in Mexico at the time on a vessel and on an oil field in Mexico, and I thought, blimey, John, you're 30. What are you going to do now? The end of the world
Mm.
is nigh. You've crossed you've crossed the Rubicon. Your
Yeah.
age now begins with a three. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And then I thought long and hard about it and said, you know what? I'm gonna investigate leaving the sea and starting a completely different career. A lot of
Hmm.
seafarers, when they leave the sea, will go into a shore-based maritime
Yeah.
role, like a
Hmm.
superintendent or something. I didn't want to do that. I thought, I'm still young enough to have a
Mm.
career change. And that was another big moment, right? And I think you'll probably know the stats better than me, Tony, but there are an increasing number of people who undertake at least one, if not two, career changes through their working life.
Mm.
But back then, it was still quite an unusual move. So I
Yeah.
went about it in a structured way and engaged the services of a career consultancy, which back
Hmm.
then was quite unusual. Nowadays, I don't know what you'd call that kind of org, but
Mm.
yeah, and that was very, very insightful for me.
Mm.
And it was basically like leaving school all over again,
Yeah.
but it really helped.
And how did that shape your thinking?
It was really interesting because I remember it really vividly. It could be yesterday in my mind, really, but when I had the first meeting with the consultant that was going to advise me and guide me and prepare me for an opportunity to work in Civvy Street, you might say,
Mm.
um, I always remember what he did. He sat down at the table with me and he gave me a piece of paper and he said, John, I'd like you to write on this piece of paper all of the skills, attributes, and qualities you think you utilize as a ship's master.
Right.
I said, okay. So I started writing and I filled the page one column deep. And he turned it around. He had a look at it. He says, right, I'm going to turn the paper over And now I am going to write on the other side of the paper all of the
Mm.
skills, qualities, and attributes I think you utilize as a ship's master that could be used ashore.
Yeah.
And he filled the page 3 columns deep. And
Wow.
the difference between what he did and what I did was he was able to put my very specific nautical and maritime language into commercial language.
Mm.
And he said, I'm going to teach you how to do that over the next 2 or 3 months. And
Right.
during that period, he was putting me forward for mock interviews, just to get used to the idea of doing things that we all know now to be necessary, but I'd never experienced before. It really was like leaving school again. And
Mm.
during that period, we did some research to try and identify which industries would be most relevant to my skill set to then grow a new career. And the
Mm.
technology industry, what we now call IT, was flagged as a very appropriate industry, and that's where it started.
And what was your first IT role then, John?
So again, I was starting my second apprenticeship in my life, really, although it wasn't
Right.
really it wasn't really called an apprenticeship. But I joined IBM as a trainee salesman for mid-range systems. So there I
Yeah.
was at the age of 30,
Yeah.
joining joining this year's intake
Yeah.
of IBM recruits to teach them how to sell computers, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, blimey, this is. And again, the interview process was pretty rigorous, but I got through
Yeah.
that. And during that period, I found myself joining IBM with a collection of other candidates, other new starters, and I was, in contrast to my earlier story about being the youngest person on the ship, I was now the oldest person in that group
Yeah.
because most of the other candidates, in fact, all of them, were pretty fresh out of university, early 20s. And there was me, 30 years old, an ex ship's captain. They're going, what? How does this work? How did this guy get here?
Yeah.
But that's where it started.
It's fascinating to kind of see that, like you say, on the one hand,
Mm.
you be a ship's captain and someone's going, okay, he's a bit fresh.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
and yeah, and it's, do you know what, I'm really I've heard over the years when people have been asked to kind of vote for what's your, what do you think is the best in class sales academy, sales school, sales training? It- People have always said IBM. And it's kind of seen, or it was seen as an exemplar within the
Mm.
industry for sales training. What was your experience of that?
Yes, I'd fully agree with that sentiment, Tony. And I've heard the story a number of times, and I think
Mm.
you know between IBM and Xerox, those two organizations were held in very high regard as a gold
Mm.
standard in. Yeah, we call it sales training, but it was really about life training. About understanding how to deal with people, understanding how to have conversations,
Mm.
and what it taught me was, again, back to my maritime period, I suppose, there was
Mm.
a structure to how to um, have a conversation, establish rapport, open the opportunity, drive
Yeah.
drive the demand or the desire for something that you knew you had
Mm.
that the customer didn't yet have but might express an interest in. So because IBM were very structured that way, that training program
Mm.
lasted a full year. So my first year at IBM was really in a
Mm.
trainee mode. And I
Yeah.
don't know of any technology company then or now that would take the risk of saying, you know what, we're gonna
Yeah.
we're gonna we're gonna write off that first year in productivity terms for that
Yeah.
candidate because we need to teach them. And that
Yeah.
was time really well spent in a formal, structured training class environment.
Mm.
Yeah, so it taught me a lot.
And do you think your experience of kind of maritime technology gave you an advantage?
I don't know if it's an advantage, but it certainly gave me relevance because, having dealt with the things I used to deal with, the the people side of it was very
Mm.
important. Because one of the things I had to be able to do when I was at sea was, if you think about it, when an officer changes, when an officer goes home and a new officer arrives on the vessel,
Mm.
then the person in charge, the master, has to make a pretty quick decision on the trust that's necessary to say, while I'm in bed asleep, that watchkeeping officer is in charge of this vessel at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
I've got to make a really quick decision on
Mm.
whether I trust that person. So you look at it from that side. The other
Mm.
side of looking at it is to say, well, actually, the vessels that I was experienced in my last 2 or 3 years at sea were pretty high technology vessels.
Yeah.
So my appreciation and understanding and exposure to technology was
Mm.
already there, and I was able to relate that into the world of at the time, selling mid-range and mainframe systems at
Mm.
IBM, which that was then. This is now, right?
And how did you find it going from having responsibility for systems and people
Mm,
to
mm.
being an individual contributor,
Yeah.
as it gets called? How was that?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. It was something I'd not experienced before because I'd been on the rise all of those years.
Yeah.
Each step was going to be a better one, a bigger one, a more senior one, probably with
Yeah.
more money. And
Yeah.
here I was at the bottom of the ladder again. But you know what? It didn't bother me, and it still doesn't bother me today. I have
Mm.
had managerial roles in my 36 years tech career, but
Mm.
I'm not one of those people who has to be a manager, right? I
Yeah.
enjoy being an individual contributor, and yeah, I found it a really good grounding to
Mm.
be able to work with colleagues who,
Mm.
some of whom I'm still in touch with today, all those years later, which is usually a good reference point,
Yeah.
who were a bit younger than me and would ask me questions and I'd ask them questions. And yeah, so it never
Mm.
really entered my head that, yeah, I want to be the boss. I want to be the
Yeah.
boss of IBM, I want to be the director. No, I'm not really into titles and seniority in that respect.
Mm. And so IBM, that's the thing, for entering the tech industry, I think I'll just start at the top of
Mm,
the vendor
mm.
stack. Where did you go after IBM? Where did that lead you?
So I was 10 years at IBM, and it kind of reached its natural conclusion for me. And I decided that obviously I wanted to stay in technology sector and
Hmm.
started thinking about where else would be appropriate. And the world of software began to interest me and excite me, as it still does today. And the word Microsoft started coming up
Mm.
on the agenda. I thought, well, again, a bit like the IBM, the phrase you've just used. If you're going to go into that, you might as well start at the top. And back
Yeah.
then, yeah, IBM were the pinnacle of hardware
Mm.
engineering. And likewise with Microsoft on the software side. So I started researching how I might get into Microsoft. And if I did, what sort of role would I do? And I did manage to succeed with that and joined Microsoft. And we're talking now, in 90, where was it, 1998, so the late 90s.
Yeah.
And yeah, a different world then to what it is now. But what I enjoyed about that was, again, starting from fresh again. It was another new
Yeah.
beginning. I had a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Software, I don't know. I mean, I've never written any software. I've never been a developer. I never will be. But wouldn't you have to know about that to be successful in this business? Well,
Yeah.
maybe not. Maybe there are other roles. And of course, with the sales discipline from IBM, that helped me a lot. And
Hmm.
so I ended up moving from IBM to Microsoft, which was a baptism of fire, you might say, a complete contrast. Complete
Um,
contrast.
Please tell me you didn't enter on an apprenticeship.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Yeah, that's a great question, though. I think after the two previous experiences, I can understand why you say that. No, no, I didn't. But
Uh,
yeah, I mean, moving from a very sort of disciplined,
mm.
structured environment like IBM, where it really was, the blue suit, white shirt,
Mm.
dark tie,
Hmm.
highly polished shoes, into a far more casual
Mm.
environment at Microsoft. Yeah, that was night and day, right? Management
Mm.
structures were flatter, decisions
Yeah.
were made in a different way, etc., etc. So I was
What
still
what
learning.
what was your first role at Microsoft?
I was um, I was in the what was then the beginnings of the e-commerce world. So I was in an e-commerce team,
Okay. Yeah.
in the developer evangelism group, actually. So that sounds a
Ah,
bit techy, but I didn't really need to know too much about that. I was learning that as I went. But yeah, it was all about the early days of e-commerce. So this is before the dot-com boom, right? People are
yeah.
starting to think, hey, can we use this internet thing to sell stuff online? I don't know.
Yeah.
Ask Microsoft; they'll know. Well, you know
Yeah.
what? We didn't really know. We were making it up as we went along. But it was happy times, right? I'm being a bit flippant there, but
Yeah.
there really was a degree of learning as you go.
And I think so I remember the first time I
Mm,
saw you at Microsoft because the organization I work for had been acquired, Great Plains, and
mm.
there was some kind of, I think it was like a kind of welcome day, and I don't know if you actually played the bass for us or you showed a picture of you, but you were kind of chosen to welcome us in, and I'm trying to picture if you did greet us with a guitar. I'd like to know about that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I do remember that, and I did. There was some guitar work going on there, because that music, as you can possibly see from behind me, music's a big part of my life. It's some of my
Hmm.
LP collection behind me, and
Hmm.
and that's another important aspect, right? I mean, there's all this professional stuff and joining this
Yeah.
company, joining that company, learning this stuff. But what do you do outside of work? So for
Yeah.
me, keeping my feet on the ground by, music is a very important part of my life, whether I'm listening to it or playing
Mm.
it. I'm not I'm not a massively great guitarist, but I've always had a guitar since the age of 14, actually, and
Right.
always just strummed along with it and tried to get on. But coming back to your point, yeah, I do remember things like that. And I think one of the things I took from that, because I did that sort of thing a number of times at Microsoft and at other
Mm.
places since then, the key word that a lot of people will probably use for me, and it's a word I enjoy, is evangelism. Yeah, I'm an
Yeah.
evangelist, really. I
Yeah.
enjoy I enjoy exciting people about something they didn't know they could get excited about. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what makes me happy, and the music's part of that, right?
Yeah. Um, well, I'll ask because I can see your records and assuming that we put this on YouTube, other people will see how many, John, how many in
Yeah,
the
I've got around
collection.
about 1,000 LPs, so I'm a bit of a vinyl freak, I suppose. But
Nice.
yeah, I've been collecting that over many years, so yeah, I enjoy that.
Nice. Um, and I think it's something I might come back to it later. Um, how many years did you spend at Microsoft?
I was at Microsoft for 15 years, um,
Right.
and yeah, a lot of change over that period. A lot of
Mm.
things, a lot of different roles that I had, but
Yeah.
those roles, it was, there was breadth as well as depth, and
Yeah.
yeah, but 15 years was, well, that's the longest I've ever worked for one organization, right?
And I made a note because I noticed that you said, when you're 14, you're going, right, I want to go to sea, so I'm going to research how to do it. And then you've decided at like 29, right, I want to get into the commercial world, so I'm going to research how to do that with a career counselor. You go to IBM, and then you think, I want to join the software world. I'm going to research how I get into Microsoft. So there is that kind of theme all the way through of you being quite sort of decisive, going, okay, right, if I want to get there, how do I make that happen? Um, what did you do then after Microsoft? What did you come to I want to go there. So how do I make that happen?
No, I didn't. I reached a different conclusion at that point in
Mm.
my career, Tony, and yeah, I don't think it's done me any harm so far. So what I basically did was I decided that for the previous 25 years,
Hmm.
I'd only worked for two organizations.
Yeah.
So I was like Mr. Corporate. Yeah, you
Hmm.
cut you down the middle, and it's either blue blood from IBM or a multicolored blood from Microsoft. And that's what
Yeah.
you do. You're pre-programmed
Hmm.
to regurgitate the corporate messaging from
Yeah.
big companies like that. I thought, you know what?
Yeah.
I don't really want to do that for the rest of my life.
Mm.
I want to explore some other things, but still in the tech sector.
Yeah.
So I set out on a completely different type of journey, and I thought to myself, you know what? The cloud is beginning to gain some momentum and interest.
Hmm.
So this is what 10, 11 years ago, I guess. Um, and that looks like it's got a bright future to it. So what I'd like to do is experience technology companies that are not mainstream hardware manufacturers and are
Hmm.
not mainstream software manufacturers, distributors, and sales.
Hmm.
I want to experience different sectors in the technology space.
Hmm.
So I had a I had a period of um, sort of 5, 6 years working for a number of different companies. And I
Yeah.
did that on purpose because I wanted to experience the world of the ISV, the independent software vendor,
Yeah.
the world of hosting.
Yeah.
I wanted to experience the world of reselling in
Mm-hmm.
uh, in 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 uh, in technology sales,
Mm.
and I did that by working for a variety of organizations. And over that period, I knew that the ultimate target was, you know what, a bit like going back to the earlier point, right? There's a theme here. If
Mm.
you're going to go for hardware, go for the big guys. Go for
Mm.
IBM. If you're going to go for software, go for the big guys. Go for Microsoft. If you're going to go for the cloud, I want to come to Amazon. I want to work for Amazon Web Services. Now,
Mm.
I knew over that period of 2, 3 years that I started researching it that that would not be an easy task.
Yeah.
But I set about it with a proper plan. Really, I didn't document
Yeah.
it, but it was in my head all along.
Yeah.
So when I did join Amazon Web Services, which is nearly 4 years ago now, it was with a background and an experience profile that I thought would be useful. And
Yeah.
fortunately for me, it was useful because the company hired me. And
Yeah.
here we are nearly 4 years later, and I'm now obviously approaching the twilight of my career and looking at retirement. And I never get embarrassed or worried about saying that word.
Mm.
You know, in September this year, I'll have been working for 50 years nonstop. And that's quite
Whoa.
a long time. And it's actually long enough, right? So,
Yeah. And uh, on that point, you had a couple. It's funny because I think compared to, I like to post on LinkedIn a lot. I would say you're a bit more selective, but a
yeah.
couple of your posts really stand out for me. That, and one of them I'm certain, went viral around you talking about starting a new job
Mm.
in your late 50s.
Hmm.
And I'd love for you to just talk about that a little bit because I don't think it's talked about enough, actually.
Okay. Yeah, I think as I approached um, my 50s and now 60s, of course, um, different worries, different concerns start to enter your head.
Mm,
What if I get made redundant from this company, and where would I get my next job? How
mm,
easy or difficult is it to be hired at that age? So those sorts of things started creeping into my mindset, I suppose, and thinking, well, what are you going to do about it, John? What
mm.
are you going to do about it? Because you can't just let that happen. You've got to
Yeah.
stay on the front foot. So the way I started thinking about it was, first of all, is the even though I'm not going for a new job, but every individual part of my life, pretend that you are and keep your CV up to date
Mm,
and play your resume back to yourself. What would you look like in front of a potential hiring organization? Even though you had no intention of doing that or going for an interview, doing the role play, what would you look like? And for me, it was about breadth and depth of experience.
mm,
There are two dimensions there. How wide have you done stuff, and how
mm,
deep have you done stuff?
mm,
And where do those two things intersect? How do you, I asked myself the question, how do I help others and how do I learn from others? And in equal quantities. It's very easy for someone of my age and experience to say, "Yeah, yeah, I know everything. Of course I do. You can't tell me anything." And I'd never say those words, right? But
Yeah.
some people do, and okay, that's anyone's prerogative to do that if they want to.
Mm,
But I don't work like that. And I'm thinking, here I am now in my mid 60s, and I work with some very young people
yeah.
in my current organization, and I learn as much from them as they learn from me. And that's what's helped me go forward all the time. And it's
Mm,
not about, yeah, what are the 10 things you need me to do for this job? Yeah, I've done 9 of them.
mm,
So one of the techniques I often use, and I still use it today, even though I'm
mhm,
not looking for work, is when I look at job descriptions and advertisements for jobs, I will take that job description and I'll use a color code, red, amber, green to say, and I'll look at every single line in that job description and say, be honest with yourself, John. Can you do this? Have you done this? Is it red, amber, or green? And there's always a substantial level of red. And that
mhm,
gives me an opportunity to say, right, how do I now go about learning about this?
mm. Great. Great tip. Versus I can't do it. Oh well.
Yeah,
Um, I love that idea of being on the front foot. Think because like you say, it's a possibility. These things can happen. Um, so what are you going to do to mitigate against if that does happen? How
yeah.
do you maintain some level of control of your own destiny?
And I think a lot of that, Tony, is about asking yourself the question, how are you going to show up at work today?
Mm,
What will you look like to others? Are you glass half
mm,
empty or glass half full? And there are times in our
mm,
life when we have to be both, but largely I'm glass half full. And
yeah.
just exuding that confidence, even if you're
Mm,
not confident, yeah, transmitting an aura,
mm,
transmitting an air of confidence and ability is part of the job. And I always say
mm,
that, when we're talking to anyone, if it's a customer, a partner, our own family, friends,
mm,
transmitting that confidence and that happiness, that's part of the job done, right? The detail will come
mm.
later. Would I would I would I go over the top for this person?
Yeah,
Will he
yeah,
or she convince me that whatever they say, I'm going to do it?
yeah,
Yeah, and it's that attitude, I think, show up with a positive attitude every single day.
yeah,
And I laugh about something every single day of my life. It's really important.
yeah.
So yeah, that's those sorts of things, I suppose.
It's a great point, though, because I think if we reflect on people we may have worked with or known throughout our career or our personal lives or whatever, it might be if someone says, "Oh, do you remember so and so?"
Mm.
And you say, "Yeah, I can't remember what they did, but they were either, you know, a misery guts or, yeah, they were always optimistic, helpful, supportive. People,
Mm.
they say people will remember how you made them feel, not
Yeah,
what you did."
that's it.
Yeah. Um, unless you did something really special. Um, now you've got I know this because you told me. Got, hang on, 4 children. Yeah.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. You're one of four and you have four.
Hmm.
Um, how did your experiences inform how you advise your children, if they asked for it, in their own careers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and part of the answer was embedded in your question there when you said if they asked for it. That's where
Yeah.
that's where we start, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, as my children were growing up, obviously I was no longer in the seagoing career, so I was at home.
Mm,
So a lot of them, obviously, coming to and from school, collecting them from school, all the things that parents do. But as they approached teenage years, just like when I approached teenage years, the conversations about career and exams and university and higher education start to
mm,
appear. And one of the things that I made my children very clear about um, back then is you do not treat higher education or university as a must-have.
mm,
Do not treat it as, well, everyone's got to go there, haven't they? I read it in the
mm,
newspapers, I see it online. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of young people going to university and they all get a great education.
mm.
Well, there is just as much value, and I'm an example of that because I didn't go to university, just as much
Yeah.
value to follow a professional path in a different direction. And actually, what was quite interesting for me is that two of my children went to university and two didn't.
Mm,
And without going into too much detail, because I
yeah.
don't want to share everything, but
Yeah.
without going into too much detail, none of those two roads, those two paths, have caused any of my children any challenges. They've all
Mm,
done very, very well. The two that went to university and the two that didn't go to university. And
mm,
that for me is testimony to the belief that, understanding everyone's good at something. You just got to find out what it is that you're good at. And
yeah.
if you find some things along the way that you're not good at, well, okay, cast them to one side, treat it as a learning. Put it
Yeah.
put it to one side and move on. And
Mm,
all of my children took that attitude. And I'd like to think that some of the coaching, well, I call it coaching, I didn't call it coaching to them, but some of that advice, guidance, and gentle coaching, because I wasn't going to be in any way, and I wouldn't be today if I had my time again, in any way heavy-handed about that. People
Mm.
have to find their own path, and giving a youngster the best start in life to help them determine that is what I was about, and still am about. And my wife and I very proud of the fact that we hope we've done a good job with that. And the testimony
Mm.
is how successful our children are these days. So, yeah, I think that whole question of, well, I'm going to have to go to uni, aren't I? Because all my mates are going. And I
Mm.
always remember that one of my children did sort of play that back to me by saying, "Oh, all my mates are at uni and I'm not, and does that mean I'm not as good as them?" Stop right there. No, it doesn't mean you're not as
Mm.
good as them. What it means is you've chosen a different career path. You are building skills in alternative areas without academia being at the forefront, professional apprenticeships at the forefront, and
Mm.
actually, you will not have the multi-year burden of a student debt to
Yeah.
live with. So yeah, I think it's horses for courses, and I suppose in my example, two at uni and two not at uni is almost the perfect dichotomy, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. Um, so, and only tell me what you can tell me, John. Don't want to set the horses running. What's next? If I'm sure you've got something, a decision in there somewhere, but what are you able to share? What's next? What you might like
Yeah, I
to do
think it's a great question. A lot of people are asking me that these days,
next?
given my and I'm not backwards in coming forwards. I'm not frightened, and I'm
Mm.
not embarrassed about saying to people, "Hey, I'm in the older part of my life now, and I'm coming in the
Yeah.
twilight of my career. So I am thinking about retirement. Of course, I am. Who wouldn't be?"
Mm.
And I think for me, there's a period of reflection. So there will be a period when I decide to stop work,
Mm.
where I don't do anything
Yeah.
for a few months and
Mm.
let all of that 50 years of professional blood sort of drain from my body, I think, all that stuff that you used to remember, John, well, forget about it.
Yeah.
And then at some point during that transition, I suppose you could call it that, into a life that is more focused on two things that are top of mind for me: my
Hmm.
health and my
Hmm.
family.
Yeah.
And both of those things are in good shape, and I want them to remain in good shape. So that's what
Yeah.
begins to be the priority. Work is great, of course it is, and
Hmm.
I've had 50 years of it,
Yeah.
but so is life. And I know we often use in this and any industry these days that whole phrase of work-life balance is a poignant phrase, and
Mm.
everyone's got a view on it, everyone's got a different experience of it. But as I approach the end of my working life, that seesaw will balance completely life. There's no work, it's life. But
Yeah.
that brings with it another question, and that is to say, well, John, how are you going to deal with just suddenly stopping after 50 years?
Mm.
It, your brain will need to be
Hmm.
kept topped up. How are you going to stay uh, fulfilled? How are you going to
Yeah.
spend your time? And yeah, I am thinking about that now, and it's not something where I don't want to share it too much on here. But one of the things I will do is I am starting to jot down notes and think about, I'm going to write a book. So I'm going to write a book
E-
about my life. And that
Excellent.
will be a great project to spend time on.
Well, I fully expect to see it on some like bestsellers list somewhere because you will have researched this. Because if you're going to write a book, then you want to get it on all the shelves of all the bookshops,
Well,
obviously.
I'll let you into the current working title of my book will be
Hmm.
From the Waves to the Clouds.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Love it.
I'm thinking about that, and yeah, no, everyone's got a story to tell, right? It's just
Yeah, it's true.
how they want to tell it, how much detail you want to go to, and how more than that, it's not about me. Oh, aren't I great? Look at all this stuff I've done. It's again, it's about inspiring others. What can
Mm,
other people take from this? That could be me.
yeah. That's awesome. Well, I'm just really glad that you were able to spend a little bit of time sharing that story today. If people want to kind of see your post, I guess they can follow you on LinkedIn, can't they? They can hang
Yes, they
out
can.
there.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm pretty easy to
yeah,
find on LinkedIn, and people of a certain
yeah.
age will know my name is the same as an old Blue Peter presenter, John Noakes. But yeah, there's not too many John Noakes on LinkedIn, but you will find him there.
Lovely. Brilliant. Thank you so much, John.
Well, thanks, Tony. I enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for the questions and the opportunity.
My pleasure.